In a previous video, I told you about Manchester's involvement in what really was the birth of police radio communications for the UK. However, today we'll be heading over to the USA, to Chicago, to look at how the rollout of shortwave radio really changed things for the police battling criminals and gangs in the city. 90 years ago, in the spring of 1932, the arrival of shortwave at Chicago's police headquarters was officially announced in the pages of American publications by Western Electric Company. The headline was, "The New Weapon in the War on Crime, Police Turn to the Radio Telephone for Help." Western Electric was well known in Britain for its sound recording system for movies, but equally well known in the USA for its telecommunication and satellite activities. Many cities in America were trialling police radio. In fact, Detroit in Michigan had started way back in the early 1920s, but Chicago was the first major city to roll out a shortwave system on such a big scale. So let me set the scene for you. In Chicago, there was a large room at the top of the police headquarters in Lower State Street with a table down the middle. This table would seat 17 or 18 men in their short-sleeved shirts with cigars in their mouths, green celluloid shades over their eyes, and telephone receivers clamped over their heads. At the end of the table was a cabin for the wireless operator, and the two men nearest to him were emergency officers dealing only with serious crimes. Along the walls of the room were telephone girls who received the SOS calls. Most of them acquired the skill to reduce the most incoherent cry for help to a common denominator of address, cause and effect before passing it on to a detective at the middle table. The message was scribbled on a sheet torn from the block in front of him and then passed through an opening in the wall of the wireless cabin. Inside this cabin there was a map of Chicago divided into numbered squares. In front of the operator was an instrument that looked like a telephone switchboard. It was also divided into squares numbered to correspond with those on the map, and each containing rows of electric light bulbs which represented the police cars patrolling that particular area. When an SOS came in, the wireless operator looked at the map to see which district was concerned. He then pressed a button on the corresponding portion of the switchboard, and by the number of bulbs that flashed into light, he knew which cars were at his disposal. The Chicago Police Department had to cover an urban area of around 400 square miles, and it was to the city's credit that it was one of the first cities in the USA to use shortwave radio on such a large scale. One or two Canadian cities on the other side of the Great Lakes claimed to have been the first, but Chicago took the new medium seriously. In fact, in the early days of CB mobile radio, when it was still an untried medium, the state of Michigan initiated some of the first experiments in mobile radio use by ordinary citizens, for example, traffic condition reports. The approach back in the 1930s was that of flexibility. At least 80 police cars used radio on night patrols, but the number could be increased rapidly to up to double the amount. Contemporary descriptions of the equipment suggest that it took up a lot of space. For example, sometimes loudspeakers were mounted in the roof of the police car, apparently above the driver's head. This explained the necessity of seatbelts and crash helmets, since any sudden leap by the vehicle could have caused head injuries. One example in which the system proved its worth was when a communist riot affecting the whole of Chicago's south side was counteracted by the quick use of police radio. About 50 police cars were brought in quickly, made possible through radio contact, and no more than 5 minutes had passed between the report of the riot and the moving in of 50 radio-armed vehicles. Within 15 minutes, 500 policemen were mobilised and the riot was brought under control. The Chicago Police Department claimed that usually an SOS call was answered within 30 seconds minimum to 2 minutes maximum. Each car carried a radio on the dashboard, and its 4 or 5 occupants were armed with heavy revolvers as well as sawn-off shotguns with repeating magazines. If they were going to storm a position in which gangsters had entrenched themselves, they carried tear gas bombs as well, and bulletproof shields 4 feet high. A list of stolen cars hung on the windscreen, and the man beside the driver was supposed to keep his eyes peeled for these cars. Each car picked up every police message transmitted from headquarters, and as soon as a police car picked up a call to its own number, off it went. As soon as it was within range of the suspect car, the detective on the front seat would usually start firing. Behind him, at each window, was the barrel of a shotgun. It conjures up quite an image, but let's get back to radio. The real work in developing shortwave radio in the USA was pursued, as I said, by Western Electric and perhaps one or two other organisations. In 1930, for example, the Bell Laboratories arm of Western Electric provided two-way radio-equipped aircraft for a demonstration of airborne police radio using a Ford Trimotor and a Fairchild aircraft, and I forget the type. The organisation set out to prove that a flying policeman could contact headquarters as easily as a cop on road patrol. Conditions in the aircraft were somewhat cramped, but the demonstration was successful. During the experiment, Police Commissioner Edward Mulrooney of New York conversed with Captain A.W. Warlander of the Police Air Service as he flew at a height of 2,000 feet above New York. Both aircraft were equipped with Western Electric shortwave radio telephone equipment, the message being picked up by a ground base at Whippany, New York State, and then transmitted via cable under the Hudson River to the police headquarters. In December of 1930, Western Electric demonstrated the first application of their radio telephone to harbour craft, in this case the 4-boat John Purroy Mitchell, stationed at New York Harbour, and the flagship for New York's firefighting fleet. Fire Commissioner John J. Dorman of New York was able to converse with Deputy Chief McElligott, who was stationed at the Marine Fire Headquarters on Lower Manhattan, about 2 miles away. Here, a shortwave radio telephone transmitter and receiver were in use for monitoring distress signals. That first modest experiment at the end of 1930 really heralded a new age. If we go further back, in the late 1920s, the Bell telephone system opened transatlantic telephone communication as well as a link between the USA and Paris, but shortwave itself was the focus of attention. On December the 8th, 1929, using a transmitting station at Deal Beach, New Jersey, the first telephone call was made from the USA to a ship at sea, in this case the Leviathan and its master Commodore Harold A. Cunningham. Calls from the Leviathan to shore came via a receiving station at Forked River, New Jersey, using, for that time, sensitive directional antennae. On board the Leviathan was a small room equipped with a microphone transmitter to permit passengers to use the new radio telephone system. While the US Navy had years before established a system for military use, this 1929 demonstration showed that shortwave radio communication had many commercial and private possibilities. And most observers back in the 1930s would completely agree that police shortwave radio certainly contributed to the cleaning up of criminals in Chicago.